Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I have to be careful here. I don't want to fall off. I once fell off a stage holding onto the lectern. It was a Law Society of New South Wales event. I said, someone better help me or I'll sue the Law Society. Can I say that it's a great honour for me to give this small talk about my friend and most famous Attorney General of recent times, Geoffrey William Shaw. Can I acknowledge here today Mrs. Elizabeth Shaw and her boys, as I still think of them, James and Jonathan, although Jonathan is now a dad. As I explained to Elizabeth, I'm terribly jealous. My grown-up children don't seem to have thought of grandchildren yet. And I asked Elizabeth, what is the magic? How do you organise this? I can also wish to acknowledge many of judges here tonight, politicians. I would like to acknowledge my good friend, Senator Christina Keneally. I always like to say I taught her husband, Ben, who is a very brilliant student. And they're both very brilliant people. Geoffrey William and I were born a year and 2 days apart. He on the 10th of October 1949 and me a year earlier. And so we would often joke that some of the best people we knew were born in October. And I see his firstborn was also born in October, so a great month. Mary and I came to Sydney at the end of 1992 when I took up the very first chair in labour law for the whole of Australia. And that's when I first got to know Geoffrey William. And I first got to know by a phone call in 1993, which was, "You're the new professor." Yes, sir. "I need some American labour law books for bargaining in good faith. You must have them." I said, "Yeah, I'm sure I've got them." So he races into my office full of books, and I said, "Go for it," and he took a whole pile away, and that was my first memory of him. But to go back, he had an education here in Sydney and then went to the University of Sydney Law School. Not only did he study law, where he did brilliantly, but he also studied literature and history. And he'd always had a great love of English literature, and we used to often talk about the classics. Well, as you know, he left university, was a lawyer, married Elizabeth, then went to the bar, and he was always on the side of the downtrodden and the workers. And at the ripe old age of 31, he took an appeal to the Privy Council in the famous Caltex oil case. It was under what was known then as 88F, which I think is now 106 of the New South Wales Act. It got emasculated by a federal Conservative government, but it was a regime whereby you could challenge the unfairness of a contract for work performed in an industry. And after Stevenson and Barham, it went into its own, and Geoffrey, by winning the Caltex oil case, made some important jurisprudential events in the law. And of course, he went into the Legislative Council to fill a casual vacancy in 1990 and fought against the infamous Industrial Relations Act of 1991. Not only did he take my labour law books, well, borrowed them, as all good barristers do, but a few months later I was getting admitted to practice in New South Wales. I didn't know anybody, so I rang up Jeff. I said, Jeff, remember you borrowed my books? He said, yes. I said, do you think you could admit me to legal practice? And he said, I'd have to perjure myself. And I said, look, okay, you can do that. So yes, he was very politeful. Then, of course, he became, with the winning of the election in March 1995, he became Minister for Industrial Relations and also Attorney General. And while his heart was with labour relations, I think he really enjoyed being Attorney General, which is a high pillar for we lawyers. He was asked by Bob Carr to establish a task force to do away with the infamous 1991 Act and to write the Industrial Relations Act 1996. And I don't quite know why, but he came and asked me to be the only academic sitting on his task force. He wasn't concerned about my disability. He said, "You're capable of hard work," and he certainly was. And we and others in that task force worked very hard, and I think produced the best and the clearest Labour Relations Act in the country. Due in main part to his clear thinking. I've been in a whole series of labour relations inquiries, Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales and federally. And I just published my bio called Born at the Right Time. And if you turn to page 170, it says, "And Jeff Shaw was the ablest Minister for Labour I ever worked with and ever knew." And I mention him on and off from pages 166 to 171 because he was extraordinary. He was so practical. There were awkward, for those who remember, there were awkward transitional provisions in the old 1991 Act that got people into trouble. And so he turned to me and he said, "Ron, we've got to make these ones and the appeal rights work properly." And I said, being an academic, "Oh, is that important?" He said, "I'm serious, Ron. We have to get it right." And he did. The Act worked very, very smoothly. He was also an important reforming Attorney General. He was against, in those days you may remember, the Bill Clinton 3 strikes and you're out was going round the common law world. That's what we want, minimum sentences, 3 strikes and you're in jail. And he, in a minority of his own government, fought against that sort of populist notion. He saw sentencing as a very special thing which should be left to judges to think clearly, to show compassion and to operate as the common law had always operated. He was a great supporter of women throughout his life, and I think one of his coups was in persuading Justice Margaret Beazley to leave the federal court where she was developing a great career and to become the first woman ever to sit on the New South Wales Court of Appeal. And my wife Mary Crock and I were there that day when she was welcomed into the Court of Appeal and when Jeffrey spoke so glowingly. Little did he think, or maybe he did think, that Justice Beazley would become President of the Court of Appeal. And then, of course, earlier this year, or was it last year now, this year, Governor of New South Wales. Can I say, had Jeffrey William not persuaded her to leave her lucrative career on the federal court, she may not have become President of the Court of Appeal, and if she hadn't become President of the Court of Appeal, I doubt that she would have become Governor of this state. So that promotion of one woman elevated women to a great extent in this state by what Margaret has achieved. He loved being in court. Of course, he worked flagrantly hard, but if there was a test case, he wanted to be in it. Right? And his aides would say, "Oh, you've got a lot of work to do, Minister." He'd say, No, I've got to do it. And those of you who remember him in court, he'd always have one hand in his pocket while he flayed the judiciary. He had that relaxed style as an advocate. I learned a great deal from him. I learned, or I hope I learned, more about humility. He was terribly humble towards academics. I never quite understood why, because he really was one of the best legal minds of the last decade of the 20th century, very clearly to me. But he was very humble and he would treat everybody with respect. He left politics, went back to the bar and became a judge in 2003. And I was there during his welcome. He is the only judge I'm aware of who in his, do you call it inauguration welcome speech, quoted one of my heroes, E.P. Thompson's The Making of the English Working Class. no other judge. I said to him afterwards, I said, you really quoted that? He said, yeah, because I believe in it. I think being a judge is very difficult in the sense it's a lonely profession. When you are at the bar, you're with your friends, there's a great deal of camaraderie. But being a judge, particularly a first instance judge, as distinct from a multi-member court of appeal, is tough. And I think he found it tough. It's a pity, I think, in retrospect, that he wasn't put straight onto the Court of Appeal. After all, we've just appointed a brilliant person as President of the Court of Appeal, Andrew Bell, who hadn't before been a judge. I'm not comparing people, but Geoffrey William had enough brilliance to be on the Court of Appeal. What is in a human life? I think that when it comes to the end, and sometimes expected and sometimes it's unexpected, the essence might be, have I had a good go at life? Will I be remembered after my passing? And while Geoffrey's life was cut unnecessarily short, didn't he shake the tree? He really did good for human beings. He worked hard for the oppressed. He worked skillfully as an Attorney General, and he gave us some of the best industrial relations of the last half of last century. I shall miss him. I already do. It's been 9 years since May 2010. But we shall all remember him, and we're gathered here tonight not simply or not solely to celebrate his life, we his friends, but to recognise his humanity and to see what can be done by clever, skillful and empathetic law reform and action. Geoffrey, we remember you, we wish you well, and we shall never forget you. Thank you very much.